Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Inov-8 F-Lite 245. So 3 pros that I have with this model is number 1, if you are on the market for a training shoe designed with versatility in mind, then this model could be a decent option to explore. And so more specifically, I think if you're somebody who trains in like a HYROX-like fashion where you're blending things like sled work, short runs, different forms of functional fitness and exercises into one workout, then the F-Lite 245 I think makes most sense. This model has a pretty reactive and responsive midsole, so you have the external flow midsole throughout the shoe, so you get a nice level of pop with this model, and it does feel a little bit more minimalist in nature, so you can lift in them and use them for strength work. So I do see this as a viable option for blending a bunch of modalities into one single session. The second pro that I have with this model is if you like really breathable upper constructions, and really lightweight upper constructions at that, then I do think you'll resonate with this model. So the shoe has a knit upper. It is super lightweight, super breathable, and even if I wear thicker socks in the shoe, I do find it pretty breathable, even in hotter gym settings. So I do think this is a good option to explore if you prioritize having really breathable and lightweight uppers in your training shoes. The third pro that I have with this model is that I think it can be a good shoe for folks with narrower feet and who have moderate arches. So this model has a pretty pronounced arch throughout it. Now granted, you don't get a ton of medial sidewall support here with the upper, and I'll talk about that in my cons, so that could be a knock actually on the shoe's overall fit, but I do think it's a better model for folks with narrower feet because we do have a narrower construction. This model has an Inov-8 fit score of 4. That is more on the wider side for Inov-8 shoes, but it's not the widest, and honestly the Inov-8 scale at that runs a little bit more narrow, so I do think this could be a viable shoe for folks with narrower feet. But now let's talk about a few cons that I have with the Inov-8 F-Lite 245. All right, so 3 cons that I have with the Inov-8 F-Lite 245 is number 1, while I like the upper due to its lightweight construction and breathability, it doesn't have the best security. And so for multi-directional work, for example, I was having a little bit of foot overhang because this knit just doesn't give you enough security to really lock that foot down in certain contexts. And so if you are somebody who is regularly doing a lot of lateral work in your training, then that would be something to think about, especially if you have wider feet, because if you have a narrower foot, I don't know if that's going to be necessarily the biggest issue, but definitely wide feet I could see having issues with overhang on the medial and lateral side of this toe box. Honestly, I think a beefier toe guard could limit this and fix this, so something to consider with this model, especially if you plan to use them for a lot of like athletic style and multi-directional work. The second con that I have with this shoe is that the heel can feel a little blocky. So you don't have the highest stack height in the shoe. However, the heel is a little bit narrow in my opinion, so it can feel like almost a little bit platformy at times. And so once again, if you have wide feet, I would say probably pass on this shoe because I'm not convinced you're gonna feel super comfortable with this model due to its heel and its upper construction. So food for thought with this model. If you've never worn an Inov-8 shoe, so like the 260 V2 or the G300 or F-Lite 235 V3, then I think that will be way more pronounced for you. If you're used to Inov-8 shoes, you'll likely not mind the heel, but it is something to think about before investing in this shoe. My third con with this model is that as you get more niche with your training, I think that's where the shoe's performance is going to start to fall off. So for example, with lifting, this is not my favorite model for going super heavy in. Despite having a lower stack height and a decently stable midsole, I just feel like the upper doesn't do justice to giving your foot a nice security, and honestly, it's just not my favorite due to the narrower heel construction. When it comes to CrossFit, despite having rope tech on this model, I didn't find this model to be that great for rope climbing and more CrossFit specific training because with this, once again, lack of upper security, honestly, I would just rather a shoe that has a bit more beef to it because that will be a slightly more durable model. I would be worried about the abrasion on the toe box for burpees in this model and for rope climbs throughout the midfoot. So I would say if you're going to use them for CrossFit or functional fitness, use them sporadically. And if that's a primary way that you train, then you might want to pass on this model. Overall, the F-Lite 245 has been a strong shoe, but there are definitely areas and gaps where I think it falls short. But now let's talk about the performance of this model. To discuss the performance of the Inov-8 F-Lite 245, I'm going to break this section into a few different parts. I'm going to talk about lifting, versatile training, short runs, and daily wear in this model. So in the context of lifting, this shoe does an okay job. I think it'll be best served for folks who want them for like light to moderate strength sessions. So if you're going to be using them for accessory work, or if you're doing like athletic style or functional fitness workouts where you're blending some strength work in, the shoe should be okay. The reason they're not my favorite though for like heavier barbell training is for 2 key reasons. Number 1, one, with that lightweight upper, you don't have a ton of security in the shoe. And so what I was noticing is that the medial sidewall, I think, could use a little bit more support, especially for heavier strength work where you're really trying to ground the feet. A second reason why I don't really like this model for heavier strength work is with the 3mm lugs here on the outsole, I prefer a flatter base to really grip the floor with. And so with this shoe, while this outsole is great for versatile style work, I found it to be a little bit off-putting for heavier strength sessions. So just food for thought with this model is that it may be a little bit limiting if you are planning to use them for like maxing out your deadlifts, squats, or even doing heavy machine work. When it comes to versatile training, I like this model for the most part. And so there are two things that I really enjoy and one thing that I'm not the biggest fan of. The first thing that I enjoy is the overall lightweight construction of this shoe. This model is super lightweight, feels very athletic, and honestly, for sessions where you're doing a lot of explosive work or a ton of jumping, the shoe feels really easy to wear for those sessions and for longer bouts of that style of activity. The second reason why I like the shoe is the overall midsole construction. So with this external flow midsole, you do get a nice level of pop in this model, and that outsole does move well. So you have that dynamic fascia band, you have some MetaFlex tech up here in the forefoot, and so the outsole with the midsole here give this shoe a nice maneuverable feel. The reason I'm not the biggest fan of this shoe for versatile training is for multi-directional work, and I mentioned this in my cons, but you can get a little bit of foot overhang with the upper in this model, and also the tongue isn't gusseted, so the tongue can slide over at times. Not the biggest deal, but it is food for thought for folks who plan to use this model a lot for like HIIT workouts where you're doing a lot of multi-directional exercises, or if you're planning to buy the shoe for like agility style training where you're gonna be changing direction a lot and you want maximal security in your shoes. When it comes to short runs, this model does an okay job. So with the midsole in this shoe, it is a little bit softer than like the PowerFlow midsole in the 260 V2 and 235 V3. So it is a little bit more responsive, and you do have a slightly more minimalist feel in the shoe. So if you're somebody who likes a stabler ride when it comes to running, or if you do like having a training shoe that's a little bit more low to the ground for your running training, so if you're tacking on a couple of miles pre or post workout, then this shoe could be a good option to explore. I could also see this model being a good option for HYROX training, where you are going to be doing shorter runs blended with like sled work and other functional fitness movements. With this more aggressive outsole, I think it does do a good job with grip on different surfaces like turf, and overall, you do get a nice blend of stability and responsiveness in this shoe. When it comes to long distance runs, I would say probably pass on this model. It'll prolong the shoe's overall lifespan, and honestly, it's just not that specific for that style of training. When it comes to daily wear, the shoe does an okay job. I like their overall low-key and refined appearance, and they breathe really well, so they are a model that you could technically wear all day. However, I think if you have narrow or neutral width feet, this model would be way more comfortable for you. Once again, for wide feet, I would pass on the shoe. And even if you have narrow or neutral width feet and you like more width through your midfoot and toe box, I could see this model being a little bit off-putting for all day wear because once again, they do run a little bit more narrow. Overall, the shoe does an okay job, but there are things where I think it could be improved. When it comes to the price of the Inov-8 F-Lite 245, you can expect to pay $140 USD. Honestly, I feel like that price is a little high for what this shoe offers. When you compare this model to other Inov-8 shoes, for example, like the F-Lite G300 or even the F-Lite 260 V2, this is by far, I think, the lowest tech-heavy shoe, and the durability, because of the knit upper being so lightweight, I don't think is the best, especially long-term. So you might want to look into those models, especially if you do want your shoes to go a little bit longer. Overall, though, I do think this price point for this model is a little bit high. All right, so now to answer the question, who are the Inov-8 F-Lite 245 best for? So I think if you're an athlete and lifter looking for a shoe to tackle like HYROX-style workouts or even compete in HYROX, this could be a viable option to explore. It has a slightly more aggressive outsole, so it should grip turf well for the heavier sled pushes, and it does a pretty good job at blending short run performance in with more functional fitness. I could also see this being a good option for folks with narrower feet who need a shoe that has a nice narrower last to really hug their feet well. Now, that being said, who shouldn't invest in this shoe? I think if you're wanting a model primarily for lifting or CrossFit, you'll want to look into other shoes because this model I don't think will perform the best in those contexts. Also, if you have flat or wide feet, I would also suggest passing on the shoe because it runs a little bit narrow, and without that medial sidewall support, I could see that being off-putting, especially for folks with flatter feet throughout the midfoot. When it comes to sizing and fit in the Inov-8 F-Lite 245, I think if you have narrow width feet, you should be safe going true to size in this model. If you have neutral width feet and you often find that you have more room at the end of your toe box, you should also be safe going true to size in this model. If you have neutral width feet and you often find that you don't have a ton of room, or if you just want to play it safe in this shoe, I would say go up a half size. And then if you have wide feet, once again, I would say probably pass on this shoe, because I think even if you size up and get more length, I'm not convinced you're going to have enough width, especially through the toe box, for your foot anatomy. When it comes to the weight, heel to toe drop, and insole in the F-Lite 245 for my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 8.4 ounces. That is pretty lightweight for a training shoe. The heel to toe drop in this model is 3 millimeters, and this model does feature a removable foam insole. All right, now let's break down the construction of the F-Lite 245. Up here on the toe, we have an extended outsole layer that wraps up. It's pretty thin in nature, and honestly, I wish this was widened, because with this knit, I'm curious to see how this will perform long-term for things like burpees or toe dragging movements. So I would love to see this widened in future models or iterations for that matter. Looking at the upper of the shoe, we have a knit that wraps the entirety of the upper of this model. The forefoot and midfoot in this shoe are super breathable and lightweight. This knit moves really well, so it does kind of form fit the foot, but once again, you don't have as much security in the shoe because the knit is so lightweight. So it would be really cool to see an additional toe guard in this model, or beefed up security around the forefoot to give this model a stronger performance for multi-directional activities. Looking at the midfoot, we have 5 core eyelets that wrap up this model, and then the tongue itself is padded in mesh, and we do have a loop. However, it is not gusseted, so it would be cool to see a gusseting of this tongue too for additional tongue security. We have some Inov-8 branding here on the lateral heel of this model, and then looking at the midsole, this model features Inov-8's Xturo Flow midsole. It does have a nice blend of stability and versatility. And then looking at the outsole, you have a pretty aggressive outsole when it comes to the lugs. So this model features 3 millimeter lugs, and you do have that dynamic fascia band and some Metaflex up here in the forefoot. You also have some rope tech on the midfoot of this shoe, but once again, honestly, I feel like they just kind of slapped that on, and it doesn't really do too much for rope climbing support, especially with giving you bite when you are climbing. Overall though, that kind of wraps up the gist of this shoe's construction. Once again, we do have that removable foam insole, but this is definitely one of the least tech-heavy training shoes from Inov-8 in my opinion. But if you have additional questions on the construction of this model, drop a comment down below. Alright guys, that wraps up my review of the Inov-8 F-Lite 245. Overall, I like this shoe. However, there are definitely areas where I think it could be improved, and I think the price is a little bit high for this model, especially when you compare it to other Inov-8 training shoes. If you have additional questions about the 245, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always guys, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Especially, not especially, it is especially, especially. I got it.